Welcome back to the Discover podcast, where we view faith as a discovery journey with Jesus to help you become the person God created you to be. Hey, welcome back to this episode of the Discover podcast. You know, we've been in this series where we are sitting down with counselors, therapists, and today we introduce a spiritual director into the conversation. Mark Werner is somebody who used to work on staff at Meadowbrook Church. So if you've been around Meadowbrook Church for a while, you may know Mark personally. And we kind of circle around three different themes of spiritual direction, specifically around longings, how to be curious about your longings, and then how to be compassionate toward yourself, maybe sometimes when you make unintended mistakes or have longings that are maybe not always aligned with what Christ desires for you. So enjoy this conversation with Mark, and thanks again for tuning in. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Discover podcast. I'm sitting here today with a very special guest, Mark Werner. And some of you who've been around the church for a long time may know Mark well, remember Mark well, because Mark, at one point in time, you were on staff here at Meadowbrook Church.
Yeah, 21 years.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about kind of what you did here for those who weren't around then,
Sure.
What that season of ministry was like for you, kind of maybe what you did before, and then you're not on staff now, obviously.
Yeah,
so
right.
what are you doing now? Just kind of maybe give us a little introduction around those things.
Yeah, no, thanks. Well, it's kind of fun being back. Mm-hmm. In some ways, as I was driving over here, it was like there is a kind of a going home. Mm-hmm. I think of 6 days a week I was in this building, and now I love the changes.
Yeah. We were just walking through showing Mark all the renovations that we did this last year. And just for people to know, I did not know this, but your lasting mark on this building is still present. The coat
racks,
hangers, coat racks down the kids' hallway were installed by this man.
So when you can look at them, you can see them routed, see any mistakes, that's me.
Yeah.
But no, I spent, out of college, I spent 11 years on staff with Crew. And then about the 8th or 9th year, Meadowbrook was just beginning to be launched. And the pastor had asked me, he says, hey, would you ever consider joining a pastoral team? And I had been going to seminary at Trinity and really saw in my future being in a church. And so I said yes, as a matter of fact. And so I left my position on staff with Crew and then came to work at Meadowbrook and stayed here 21 years.
Wow.
And when I was first asked to come, it was to do 2 jobs. One of them was to do men's ministry and then youth ministry.
Okay.
And I remember so distinctly saying, I'll do the men's ministry. I really kind of get it. That gets me excited. And yes, because you need someone to do youth, I'll do youth. And the great surprise of my life was how much I loved doing youth ministry and being with students in that age group from junior high and then seeing them go on to college. That for me became a really satisfying place to be. And so that was my role. And then when my children became in junior high, I just thought they need some other voices in their life teaching them about what God is and how to follow after Him. And so I shifted my position from doing youth ministry and men's ministry to taking over what we at the time called spiritual formation and adult discipleship.
Yep.
And then did that for a number of years, and then took over kind of an operations title, operations director, where I oversaw a lot of the functionings of ministries as well. So,
would you have been here? You probably would have been here before we were in this building. You would have been part of when we were in schools.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. So that history of where it went from the 88th Street School to the 92nd Street School to here.
Yeah.
I was a part of that.
Yeah, and then you would have been here then probably 10-ish years after we got in this building?
Correct. Yeah.
Were you doing college ministry with Crew at Marquette or UWM?
Yes,
Okay.
and so they asked me to direct what they called at the time the ministry in Milwaukee, and that included Marquette as well as UWM and some of the things that we were trying to pilot.
That's funny.
At
So
our schools.
I'm just making this connection now that we just hired a new discipleship director, Jake Milsna.
Okay.
And he probably had that job before he came and worked here.
So Meadowbrook's doing it again.
Yeah,
they're grabbing another crew staff.
That is too funny.
No, that is. I like to hear that.
Yeah. So where would you have been going to church at that time? Would you have been attending church here?
Yeah. So I was attending Meadowbrook. The first service that we went to at Meadowbrook when it was in the 88th Street School was we were locked out of, or they were locked out of. And so we ended up doing a service on the lawn.
I've heard of that.
Some of the people that may be around may remember that. So
and that was the first service?
That was the first service.
And it didn't deter you to come back? You're like, oh, we'll give it another shot.
Yeah.
Even though they maybe don't have their stuff together all the time.
Right. Well, the funnier part of the story is I was in a playground, a park, and I was sitting with my daughters. I had 3 daughters at the time, and they were playing, and I overheard this couple kind of arguing a little bit, and I thought, I can probably help here. So I kind of introduced myself a little bit, and we struck up a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
And they told me that they were Christians, and they said, "Well, are you attending a church?" And I said, "Well, we're actually looking for a church." And they said, "Why don't you come to Meadowbrook? It's a brand new church plant." And so they are no longer in Meadowbrook, but they were here for a number of years. But my invitation to come to Meadowbrook was kind of a divine appointment.
Yeah, that's neat.
That somebody kind of invited me.
Yeah, it's neat. So you served here 21 years.
21 years.
And so what are you doing now?
Yeah, I work with a nonprofit ministry called Grace Bridge Alliance. And Grace Bridge Alliance is a ministry that was designed to be in that place of support for those people who are in ministry.
Yeah.
So I've been in ministry now over 40 years. But the launching of Grace Bridge was kind of conceived in this place of who cares for those who are shepherds.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a really, really important role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of challenges that I think people in ministry sometimes experience. And so our staff are made up of people who have been in ministry.
Yeah.
And so that's been fun to see a companioning ministry of people who come alongside full-time people who are in ministry.
Yeah. So do you primarily work with people in ministry, even as an organization, or do you guys also work with other people who aren't in ministry as well?
Yeah. So the companioning ministry that we do is called spiritual direction, and spiritual direction is a little bit newer to I think the broader evangelical community, but we work exclusively with those who are in ministry, but not everyone that we are working with now is in ministry.
Got it.
All right.
So maybe you've walked with them as they've transitioned.
And some people have transitioned.
Out.
Yeah. And so that ministry is ultimately in supporting kind of that which is the faith-filled life.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's as hard as it is to say that there is a need to transition out of something.
So I'm gonna frame our conversation and how this is connected with where we've been over the course of the last 20-some episodes or so. So we've been in a season called Storytellers. This is the first season of our podcast. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking to counselors and therapists. You're our first spiritual director.
Okay.
And the idea of this season has been to give a platform for people in our church to tell their story. And so we did that for 15 episodes or so and had a great time just letting people tell the story of kind of where they've been on their spiritual journey, how they came to faith, what they sense God is doing now. And just through that, I said, maybe it'd be interesting to have some people who are in that kind of like counseling, caregiving role to talk to them about what they see as hindrances in people's stories, maybe how they kind of move beyond some of those things, and how the role of counseling and therapy can help further somebody's story. And so we said, well, and part of it is because we have lots of counselors here. And then we said, hey, the idea of spiritual direction could be something interesting to talk about alongside. How is that similar? How is that different from counseling and therapy? And so that's kind of where we're going in our conversation today. But
Great.
Before we do that, I think there's something that we need to acknowledge for everybody who's tuning in, and that is you and I have a common story of both being employed here at Meadowbrook Church for a season, but you and I both share a shared love for pizza.
Yes.
And I think because of that, we need to take just a minute and talk about
pizza.
Pizza. Yeah. So
I would be disappointed if you didn't, Brian.
So the thing that I just did a few weeks ago, I think I mentioned this to you, is I did a little pizza fundraiser for my kids for a mission trip, and I'm going to do it again in the weeks to come for the rest of the kids going on the mission trip. Made about 40 pizzas for people in our church, and you have an outdoor pizza oven.
Yes.
That I understand you have built with your own hands.
Yeah.
Like it's not one of these like unis that you buy. You have constructed this thing.
Yeah. So it all started with those coat racks that I built here, and I realized I can do things. I can do hard things. No, I love pizza. I had probably more. I like eating. I like food, and I always had this dream that I'd love to be able to make pizzas, and I'd love to build a wood-fired oven. And so I found some plans that were given away free by a company. They wanted you to purchase all their supplies, but I built it in my backyard.
Yeah,
I started in March with laying the concrete, and then finished at the end of July.
Yeah. Oh wow, that was a lengthy project. How long have you had it in your backyard now?
So I want to say it's going to be probably, I've been at 11 years, 13 years.
Oh wow.
13 years, yeah.
And it's still standing.
It's still, that's the crazy thing, Brian. It's something that I made. Well, the coat racks are
They're still here. You're 2 for 2.
But yeah, no, it's probably one of the things that really marks our enjoyment of summer is how we invite friends over and make pizzas. And I've taught a few people how to put out a pie, and the oven is of such a nature, it gets really hot, and so it gets 750 to 900 degrees, which by the way is the optimal temperature for cooking pizza, Brian.
Yes.
But it cooks in 3 minutes or less.
Right.
And so you get it hot, and then all of a sudden you have this beautiful pizza.
Yeah. What is your favorite thing about pizza?
Yeah, so what's favorite? I think what makes pizza great is you can literally put anything on it.
You can.
And you can try, and I have put just about everything under the sun that you can imagine, on top of a pizza. And so you have Asian themes, and you have Middle Eastern themes, and you have kind of Southwest themes that you can make pizzas with. And so
So we won't belabor this too much longer. Yeah. But what is your go-to pizza toppings?
Yeah. I like to make my own Italian sausage.
Oh. Ooh.
And so I'm like an Italian sausage guy.
And you make your own Italian sausage. That's next level.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things I like to eat. So I like to experiment with, and I like a hot Italian sausage. Okay. And it doesn't have to be much, but a hot Italian sausage and mozzarella is probably my go-to pizza.
What kind of cheese do you use?
This is a great question. Yeah. This is a profound. There's a number of dairies that I have experimented with. So Grand is a great pizza. They make a great mozzarella cheese. But the one that I've gone to is actually now I want to say it's near Ripon. And I go there special to buy their mozzarella.
Really? Yeah. Ripon, Wisconsin?
Yeah.
If I got it right, that's like 3 hours.
Wait a minute, not Ripon. Yeah, it is Ripon.
Is it?
Now I'm drawing a blank. I always drive by it, so when I go north, so I always stash up.
Yeah. Wow. Do you freeze it?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
And is it like fresh mozzarella that they make, or is it shredded?
I like to use just the kind of that high fat, low moisture mozzarella.
Nice.
Not fresh. I do like putting fresh mozzarella on pizza as well.
Yeah.
All right.
So last question: if you had to go somewhere to buy pizza, where would you go?
Yeah, so I like, yeah, it's a tough one. So I used to always say before it became a massive chain that Lou Malinati's was my favorite pizza.
Yep.
Yeah, I like a thin crust, and so Balestreri's is really Cordero Brothers. If you haven't had that one, that's a good pizza as well if you like a thin crust.
Yep.
And so I would probably recommend those.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for we did not ask you to come talk about pizza.
You had to. You told me you were going to talk about pizza, so I got really excited.
Yeah, I could do that for 45 minutes, but we won't subject everybody else to that. So let's go back to spiritual direction.
All right.
So for some people, that might be like a new idea or a new concept they may not even really understand. So can you give us like an entry level description of what spiritual direction is?
Yeah. So it's a great question because it's newer to the evangelical tradition. It's less newer to the Protestant and Anglican traditions, and it's ancient with both the Catholic and the Orthodox. And so when you put that big framework over all that which mark Christendom, spiritual direction has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And what spiritual direction is, it's that place that someone has with another where they are helping them to recognize and to follow what is the inspirations or the invitations of grace. And they do that in such a way where the end of that is a sense that God is leading. And so if you can put those words together, there's a recognizing, and then a following toward an end that God is leading. So what is it that's going on inside you, around you, that marks the grace of God? And so grace we understand in terms of kind of the big picture. It's how God reached out and saved humanity. But there are graces that mark this day. And so if we can look at all that as something that reflects the unconditional love of God, we pay attention to those graces. And so a spiritual director sits with somebody sometimes when they're in a place of not being able to see God, or sometimes when they're confused by God, sometimes when they're stuck, and they help support that person in both recognizing and follow the leading of the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
And so it's been given a lot of different names, holy listening, or recognizing where the fingerprints of God are upon this moment or in this person's life. So that's kind of what spiritual direction is.
Yeah, that pairs really well with, so we launched this podcast back in January with what we called like a kind of a vision initiative that we called Storytellers. It comes from Psalm 107 verse 2 that says, "Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story." And as you read through Psalm 107, there's these like 4 snippets or 4 vignettes of 4 different moments that these kind of characters in this story, they could even be real stories for all I know, find themselves in where God redeems them and rescues them. And so the idea was like, hey, you have a story that God has redeemed and rescued you, but we also believe that God is still present. And he's still at work. And so we use the term Kairos moment. You've probably heard Kairos before. The idea that it's the moment where God kind of like, God's kingdom comes near. And, you know, I want to say, I don't know if it was Puritan writers or somebody before that, they talk about like these thin spaces where it's like heaven and earth touch. And so one of the things that we are trying to do as a church is help people pay attention and participate to what God is doing in their life. And it sounds like a lot of the work that you do is right in line.
That's a beautiful. I love all that.
So tell me then, as you think about like, because it sounds like you've been doing this now for about 10-ish years, and what kind of brought you to say, hey, I want to give my life's work to that now?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one that spiritual directors kind of talk about as well with each other. There is this recognition, in some sense, that when they look back upon their lives, there's always been some kind of this going on of wanting to be in that space with people. And you could say, well, isn't that what pastors do? And yes, it is. So my story is one of moving through this sense of calling vocationally to pastoral ministry, and then continuing that vocational calling in a now a supporting role. So that's my story is to be with people in that place of telling their story.
Yeah.
But doing it with people whose their job is to lead others and to shepherd others. And so I get asked all the time, isn't this your work? What pastors do? Why would you be doing it for them? Don't they have that already figured out?
Right.
Figured out.
Oh, we do.
Yeah,
Sure.
you have it all. But I think what leads me into this ministry is a recognition of this process that marks my own growing and developing, and how that is continual. And so I've not arrived. And so one of the core things that mark the ethics of a spiritual director is that they too are in spiritual direction. So it's not something that I just do for others. It's something that I'm continuing to participate in my own life.
That's great. I just noticed that these books are leaning, and it's going to drive me crazy if I don't fix them.
Yeah,
that's much better.
Now you can breathe. Right. It's like, okay, they were
leaning just enough. Sorry about that.
Yeah, well
everybody.
used. That's probably what that meant.
Yeah. So how would you kind of compare and contrast the idea of spiritual direction with therapy or counseling?
Yeah, it's another great question. In simple ways, sometimes when I look at counseling, it looks at life from the horizontal. How do I become better? Or how do I improve? How do I overcome? Spiritual direction seeks to bring into that vertical. Is what is the place of God in what marks your transformation, your becoming, you're changing, you're developing. Does growing and changing have a trajectory? And so a spiritual director understands and speaks of that place of how does the spiritual, how does the vertical intersect this moment.
Yeah.
So I think all is valuable, all is needed. I've been in counseling myself. I recommend it to people. There are lots of things that spiritual directors don't talk about with people, and we trust that to those who are professionals in doing that. But what the spiritual director is very attuned to is how is God in this?
Yeah.
And sometimes that matches up with how they think God is at work, and other times it doesn't. And so there is kind of now talking a little bit about what are the ways that we understand or image God to be, and what were the things that shaped that image.
Yeah.
And sometimes those are in that place of grace reframed and reshaped, not God into my image, but into that which God is.
Yeah. So let's go back to your definition, and you're going to have to help me kind of restate what you said, but it's this idea of recognizing God's grace.
Yeah.
Can you kind of reframe that idea of like what you're trying to do with somebody?
Yeah. So I think a lot of times we look at something external and we see God in that.
Right.
All right. Or we see an event and, God was really present in it. And I'm not trying to discredit any of those.
Right.
But the reality of looking at where God is at work is in this work that is interior, mm-hmm. in that place of dwelling, in that place of God at work in you. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we lose contact with that.
Yeah.
Some things often mm-hmm. mark our inability to see that work that he's doing in me. Many people understand their walk with God in terms of their brokenness. And I'm broken. Mm-hmm. But there's more to brokenness than seeing our sin.
Yeah.
There is this work of God making new. The saving work, the healing work of God is something that is onward and continual. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we lose contact with ourselves in that place of changing, growing, becoming, transforming.
Right. And you would call that God's grace.
That's all God's grace.
Because sometimes we think of grace as like this thing that I received once.
Yeah, and now it's good.
Yeah. I only need it one time. Yeah. And that's what saves me, what gives me pushes me across the line, if you will.
Yeah.
But you're talking about grace in a different way.
Yeah. So that general grace that says that what you are, where you are from, what your source is not yourself. It is mm-hmm. from our Creator God, mm-hmm. and that God has a plan for you.
Yeah.
All right. It's not a rigid plan saying, I'm going to tell you everything that you have to do and make all your decisions. But there is this unfolding of a person in development that begins to reflect that which it means to be the fullness of the image of God.
Yeah.
And our means for experiencing that is a place of learning to live within our communion with God. Mm-hmm. And so part of the role, the responsibility of a spiritual director is to speak of that work of the Spirit that is helping you to see something larger and deeper and broader that you are within God.
So let's go ahead and put ourselves in like the place of people who are listening, right? Yep. In terms of, I think oftentimes it's when people are experiencing disconnect in their story, or they're experiencing brokenness, or they're experiencing some measure of like, I wish mm-hmm. this was different mm-hmm. in my life. Mm-hmm. And like, how would you, because I also know that a counselor would say the same thing. Like, you don't want people to become dependent on mm-hmm. you and what you do. It's not as though like they can only like mm-hmm. experience God when they're with you. You mm-hmm. help them along the way. Mm-hmm. So how could people who are listening be putting into practice some simple things that will help open mm-hmm. their awareness, open their heart to recognizing where God is at work and how they might be responding?
Yeah. I think, Brian, there is for me what is a part foundational to spiritual direction. There is a humility that recognizing in someone that I'm talking to that God has been at work in their life faithfully mm-hmm. and lovingly, much longer mm-hmm. than I've known them, and that even what I can see.
Yep.
And so when I hold that as a core value, that God is at work, even when that work on the surface is not seen, that I trust that God is at work. His Spirit has not left this world, mm-hmm. nor has he left this person. And so I trust that, mm-hmm. that when we begin talking about their experience, we will see something of the grace and of the Spirit of God at work. Mm-hmm. One author that I like says, when we experience love or when we experience kindness, they become like the pulleys and levers that rise us up in the area of being able to understand something of God.
Yeah.
So whenever we experience love or kindness or compassion or mercy, there's something that we are seeing of God in that the human spirit, the human soul resonates with.
Yeah.
I'm of the belief that the source of that is from God, our Creator. And so we rekindle that in telling our stories, even when the story is one of neglect or of trauma or of suffering.
How would you say we rekindle that when we tell our story? That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah. So when I sit with somebody, when they find themselves longing for something or being drawn to something, what is that about? All right, and so we rekindle when we kind of help people discover something deeper of their own longings and desires. The spiritual writers of the church recognize that there is in all of us a belief, and we often think that the belief is the first thing.
Yep.
But they said underneath belief, there is often a longing to believe. And so they said there's something really spiritual about being able to talk about what it is that you long for.
Yeah.
And how that longing can point to something. That's not saying every longing and desire is equal, but it is saying it can point it to something divine. So before there's a belief, there's a longing to believe. And then they even pressed it a little further, and they said before there is a longing, there is often an intuition of. And so the spiritual writers in the church often examine this space of, we intuit that life needs to make sense, or it needs to be fair, or it needs to be because we are recognizing something of what it means to be in the image of God in us.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about story, there is a time of peace, and then there's a time that disrupts peace. But that longing for peace is a beautiful example of how God is often at work in ways that we're not always even aware of.
So it's almost like you should start paying attention to your longings.
Yeah.
Start paying attention to your desires.
Yeah, and so now you're hitting, I really, because when you share that with the average person, you say, tell me of your desires and longings, and we kind of make desires and longings a marker of kind of what's broken in me.
Right.
It's my flesh, and so I can't really speak honestly about longings because they're not good.
Right.
But we have to peel the layer back.
Because I think in like James, we're studying James right now as a church, and I think this week we'll get to the passage where he talks about evil desires, and I think we often equate desire with evil.
Yeah. And sure enough, there are things that are evil, but if we pull it back, we can begin to see something deeper still that ultimately finds its origin, its source in our Creator, our God, who made us, and that we would somehow get a taste of that or long for that in our lives and then want to pursue it. And so it puts us on a quest. And the nature of the spiritual journey, going back to your question, the difference is a spiritual director is aware of that. In a way that says all of this can be reflective of something of God that is for you.
So what sort of like simple practices would you offer to people who attend Meadowbrook Church as a way to engage in the work of spiritual direction without necessarily being in a spiritual directing session?
Yeah. So practices that I think are central are how it is that we participate in our own growing, and I'm going to use the phrase self-awareness, of growing, of understanding who we are. Mm-hmm. And we do that by examining longings, examining some of our own sense of how we're showing up in relationship, and being genuinely curious about that in a way that is seeking to listen to how God is leading. The fruit of the Spirit is evident when we begin to see, love, joy, and peace being reflected in our lives. But there are barriers to sometimes. So the barriers to me loving. It may be easy to say, the barrier to my loving is that I'm sinful. And it's not a wrong statement. It's true, but it's not sufficient.
Yeah. Why would you say that?
Well, because we have to say, what is the barriers to my loving in this moment, in this experience right now? Is there something here that I'm elevating above this place of love?
Mm-hmm. So would you say that, okay, there's the barrier to my loving is I'm sinful. Yeah. Not incorrect, but I think you said insufficient.
Yeah.
Would you also say it's not specific enough?
Yeah, maybe that's a good word.
Because the more specific I can name my brokenness, it gives me an opportunity to more specifically name God's goodness and grace in my life. In the same way that, like, we can generalize God's grace, we can generalize our own brokenness and our own sinfulness. And the more specific we get around it, the more specific, I don't know if application is the right word, or awareness of how God is inviting us into another step of growth or a new experience or something that helps him to reveal us, helps him reveal himself to us. Does that make sense? Would you?
Yeah. No, I do agree with that. There is this experience we have of longing to love, wanting to love, and then sometimes the barrier that keeps us from loving. We can say it's sin, but then, and we know sin is forgiven, and it is forgiven. Right. It is forgiven. But then to see ourselves in development, to see ourselves in this place of transformation, of growing, becoming into that which reflects the fullness of Christ. What are those things that are keeping me from loving?
Yeah.
All right. And we begin to see how deeply this is a spiritual work of God that continues to call us to live in a place of our communion, our love with God. And what flows from us then is that which flows from the communion. Yeah. And so I don't know if that fully answers your question, but it does say we can oversimplify it and by saying I see the problem, but not address really what are the things that are keeping me.
Yeah. So my question was, what are the practices people can engage in? And what I heard was this idea of curiosity.
Yeah, there's a self-examination in the daily examine in the spiritual world we call about, where we reflect upon our day and we recognize things that mark the very presence of God, and also not in a literal sense, but the absence of God. We call those consolation and desolation. And
say that again.
Consolation.
And how would you define those?
Yeah, consolation. Again, oversimplifying it is to say is that place where God is, and you see it. There's a comfort to it.
Yeah.
There is a sense of this seems good to God. This seems good to us and to God. Consolation. And desolation is the absence of that. All right. And so the absence of that is not in a literal sense, because God is never absent from his world, but there is sometimes an absence of the awareness of his presence in it. And so when we see the where God is not, like, man, I'm watching two people fight in the in the grocery line because they're not moving fast enough, and they start name calling. We go, not necessarily the presence of
right.
But when we can learn to do that in our own lives in an examining way, to say, I saw the presence of God as I moved through my day, the consolation in these things. And I also saw it in me when I looked at a coworker and said, you're an idiot. And I go, that's something that doesn't mark the Spirit of God. But here's the key in that practice is, can you do that without a sense of self-loathing and judgment?
Right.
To examine your day only to go to a place of saying, I'm a failure, and not see, oh God, thank you for showing me that desolation.
Yeah.
That sense of the absence of your Spirit or the absence of your presence, and help me to become that person, that man.
Because without that awareness, like, you don't necessarily have the capacity for growth and change, because you have to see, like, oh, this is where I still need to keep growing and being conformed to the image of Christ. So it's like having compassion for yourself in the midst of your curiosity of kind of as you examine your day and you're curious about your day, having compassion for yourself in those places where you didn't get it right or fell short or whatever is really important too.
Because the very air we breathe is the unconditional love of God. The very economy that we live in is His grace. And so there is only learning and growing. And so our deepest mistakes are not terminal. All right. Our biggest failures are not the end of the story.
Right.
Because we live in an economy of grace. We live in the unconditional love of God. And that's what we feel called to. Not even feel called to. That is the drawing and the wooing of God.
Right.
When the psalmist speaks of deep calls to deep.
Yep, that's good news.
That is great news. That's the greatest news, is this unconditional reality that God is.
Yeah.
And He longs for that which He created.
That's really good. And I think we're kind of coming to that point to wind down our conversation. And so I'm wondering if there's, as you think of like kind of some parting words or parting encouragements, and or if there's just anything else that you came into this conversation thinking you wanted to share, maybe I didn't ask the right question. Just kind of, is there anything in your mind that you think would be a way to encourage God's people as they work to pay attention to His grace in their life? I I'm going to leave this conversation. I'm going, oh, Mark, that would have been such a good thing to say because you didn't say it now. I think two words. Jesus said, go learn what this means. I desire mercy or compassion. And there is this capacity that we must learn what it means to live in this world in a compassionate and a merciful way. The tendency that we often have is to come to a place of conclusion and think that we're right. And because we're right, we have permission then to stand in a place of judgment. So when Jesus says, go learn what this means, I desire mercy or compassion, that we can learn that in ourselves. And in learning that, we can relate to others in their story, not from a place always of correcting, but one that honors this good work of God, and that God has not left that person. And we can be in that place of helping them, supporting them, and recognizing that. And trust that God will do what is God's to do. Yeah, that's an interesting thought in terms of how often as Christians do we think we need to play God in other people's lives rather than trusting that no, He is God and He is God in their life, so I don't have to be God for them in whatever way that looks. whether it's through trying to save them, heal them, or judge them. It frees me to be a companion on the journey with them.
Yeah. Knowing that God is not finished.
Yeah.
He's not finished with me, and he's not finished with you. So how do we support one another in that? And in supporting with it, then there is this sense of we journey together.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably, if I could wrap up with that, that there's this sense of we're in this together.
Right. Yeah. Almost like if we do that work for ourselves, pay attention to God, be curious, be compassionate, do that for ourselves and do that with others. I mean, that would create a context and a community that everybody would want to be a part of.
Yeah. Who doesn't want to be in a place of belonging, belonging and loved? And the whole point of creation was to say this belongs.
Yeah.
You belong.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. This has been a great conversation, and you bring a real sense of peace and calmness. I can see why you fit that role of, I would be like, oh yeah, direct me. Say hard things to me. It probably sounds really good. Even, ask me those hard questions or, whatever, however it is, you just have this calmness to you. And I really appreciate that. So, yeah.
Well, hey, can I offer a blessing?
Please, that'd be great.
I have something here that I want to read, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
And this is from, I don't know if you're familiar with the author, John O'Donohue.
Vaguely.
So John O'Donohue was a brilliant young man who went on to be both a philosopher, and he became a priest. He wrote this book, The Bless the Space Between Us, when he writes of those thin spaces. So I thought maybe you would resonate with that. But this is a blessing for leaders, and so for pastors, for you and the church. He writes, may you have the grace and the wisdom to act kindly, learning to distinguish between what is personal and what is not. May you learn to cultivate the art of presence in order to engage with those who meet you. When someone fails or disappoints you, may the graciousness with which you engage be the stairway to growth and renewal.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for that blessing.
All right.
Really appreciate it. Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Thanks so much for your continued engagement here. The thing we've been saying as we wrap up these episodes where we're talking to counselors and therapists and spiritual directors is that if you're in a place of wanting to explore that, and you're wanting some help on where to go, and even if you're needing some help in the financial side of being in a conversation with somebody to get some healing and growth, we would want to partner with you and help you on that. So come talk to us, and just thanks again, Mark, for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Brian.
All right.